Hi everyone, my name is Patrani Chidananda Shastri, aka Suffocated Art Specimen, aka SAS, and I'm here at Drag Me to Heaven, a podcast where we go and talk about faith, spirituality, and how exactly individuals, especially drag artists, navigate these two concepts while they are performing drag or creating this wonderful space for each and every one of us to kind of seek inspiration from, and also to kind of look into how queerness is more visible within the art of drag. And this is at 11 o'clock in India, and I'm having this wonderful conversation with wonderful artists I will quickly kind of go and introduce. But before that, if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time, I would recommend you to kind of go ahead and listen to all the other episodes which we have bought before this. And you can also write your questions as well as comment at pcacs3@gmail.com, where I would be more than happy to kind of listen and understand if you have any queries or if you would like to share some feedback, and we'd be more than happy to receive all of them. So today I have a very wonderful, drag artist from the US, and they are Landa Lakes. They are a two-spirited person as well as a drag artist, and bringing these two identities as a part of their drag artistry, something which we'll be navigating and talking about. So, without any further ado, let me quickly go ahead and welcome Landa Lakes. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm very good. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And to be honest, for people who might not be seeing it very visually, I would like to quickly go and tell that Landa is surrounded by a bunch of wigs, and I'm so obsessed with all of that. There's this very wonderful neon wigs, and thank you so much for projecting that. It looks actually like drag queen's room. Oh, I'm gagging. Yeah, so this is so wonderful. So, to our audience who are chiming in, going with you for the first time, could you please introduce yourself? Could you please also help us with your pronouns, and also let us know what are your faith and belief, values which you, encompass?
Sure, I go under the drag name of Landa Lakes, but my name is Miko Thomas. I am Chickasaw from the Chickasaw Nation. We're originally from the southeastern United States, but in the 1830s, my whole tribe was removed to what is present day Oklahoma, which is like around 2,000 miles away. So that's sort of where my tribe settled and have built up from there. So when I go back home, we go back home to what they call a reserve or a reservation, which is supposed to be land that we reserved for ourselves. And so that's a little bit about my history of where I come from.
Great. So thank you so much for introducing and giving us the information. I want to kind of start off asking about your drag journey and how exactly it began. And does your faith or identity as a two-spirited person helped you in creating a drag persona, which is Landa Lakes? And could you also help us understand, because when somebody is coming from an idea of a specific identity which is again being marginalized in one or the other way, it helps to look into drag in a very different from the idea of mainstreamity, and somewhere or the other way, as a person sitting on this side of the world, who might not be very much accustomed with the idea of two-spirited people, and how exactly the politics of erasure of indigenous tribes within US has been a space for individuals to kind of navigate. How did your persona was built up with those identities, and what is that one thing which you always keep in mind when you're performing drag?
Well, I started drag back in the 1980s, so that was quite a long time ago. And the reason that I first started doing drag was because I was underage, and it was a way that I could sneak into the clubs at the time. And so that was really the main reason that I first started doing drag, and then I started performing just as like a part of that. I had two friends that also went with me almost everywhere I went to, and although they would dress, they never really got into the performance aspect. and later on they themselves identified more as trans. And so I was like the only one that was just like purely like a drag queen in my friend group. But I don't think that I really started incorporating. Well, for one thing, back in the 1980s, we had not yet coined the term two-spirit. That wasn't really coined until like the 1990s, and it's an English word, it's an English term, because in our own language, we say hatakeklana is sort of the word that we as Chickasaw people would use for someone. Um, and for me, maybe more directly, I might have been considered more or less something that we would call like ihohoba, which is like what you would call a drag queen. Ihohoba seems to be a woman. Would be the more direct translation for that. But I don't think that I really started pulling my two-spiritness or the Ihohoba part into my drag until probably around the 2000s. Just because, like, so that was a good span of years in between the 1980s and the 2000s. And the main reason for that was because I don't think that I really started incorporating sort of like storytelling into my drag until around that time. Before that time, it was all about like being pretty, glamorous, and doing drag was just the performance level and not really saying anything. And so I think around the 2000s was when there was a realization that I came to, that I could do more than just mimic the words. I could actually tell stories within the drag genre, and so that sort of changed my drag. So sometimes when you see one of my performances, you'll see like a little mini story, and and that's just because of the drag that I was around. So in many ways, when I was able to do that, I was able to start pulling in threads of my indigenous identity into it, and some of my indigenous faith, which I thought was really sort of cool, because I also was able to do things where I said, okay, well, I'm going to do this because this is traditional. This is what we do, within my tribe. And whether or not people understand it or not, it didn't really bother me at all. I was like, they may not understand this, but this is what I'm going to do. And those who do are what we call twice blessed, because they will see it and they'll understand it and they'll go, oh, okay, I get that. And I thought, and I think that's pretty cool. I think that's one of the cool things about drag, is that you can tell a story and then you can double layer it with tradition, and some people will get it and some people won't. But that's just that's just any story, right?
Great. So thank you so much for sharing, your journey when you started drag, and it's also something which to realize that you have seen so many years of drag, and especially from a country which I come, the drag scene is being very young. It's just started in 2018, and somewhere or the other way, the drag scene has slowly or steadily kind of kicked in into what it's still not mainstream. Like there's no RuPaul coming to India for sure so far. But having said that, there's still a little bit of a mainstream work which has been happening, with a couple of web series, etc. And as this part of the podcast, I was also talking with how identities of individuals are not something which are usually being spoken, especially if it's something which is related to faith or spirituality. Talking about faith or spirituality within a queer setup is something which is seen as non-cool, because somewhere or the other way, people have a very broken relationship with their own faith, or with their own altered identities which they kind of carry as a human being, and sometimes they're not very much comfortable in expressing those. And somewhere or the other way, as a drag artist who are supposed to express, who are supposed to create the idea of expression while they are kind of performing, it even becomes more harder to kind of push those buttons of speaking. And thank you so much. When I talk with artists like you, it helps me kind of deep dive and retrospect about how individuals, especially how this generation of drag artists need to kind of learn and understand the experiences which individuals like you would be sharing, and thank you for sharing that. Now my question is, did you had any time any conflict with your faith or with your indigenous identity of two-spiritedness, and how did you navigate those conflicts? Do you find conflicts because drag is a very westernized idea of performance? When I'm saying westernized, it's more like a European idea of performance, which kind of came to US as well. If I'm just quoting a Wikipedia page which says it started from the Shakespearean era. Having said that, we know that their gender performances was there in a lot of ethnological tribes, as well as ethnological people who holded gender performance very close to their communities. So when navigating these two identities, did you had any kind of a conflict, and if you did, how did you navigate it?
Well, all of that is really very complicated, I think, especially within like the indigenous world, because, being Chickasaw means two things. There's something that we call tradition, some of our traditional practices, which is sort of like where our faith comes from. And then you have Christianity. And Christianity, of course, encompasses so many of my tribe that oftentimes when you'll have a choice between doing a Christian prayer or a traditional prayer. And you can always hear the difference almost immediately in the very beginning, because like in our language, when we start a prayer, we always address first what is holy. So like in a traditional prayer, I would say Abba Minima, um, and that's a traditional prayer. But if it's a Christian prayer, you'll hear somebody start off by saying Jehovah. So immediate, the difference is immediate. You can hear it immediately. And the interesting part about that is that it actually comes from tradition, that we start off by addressing, by doing that address at the very beginning, because of our belief that you know God or the gods or whatever don't really pay attention to us, and so we have to grab their attention. And so before we do any prayer, we have to start off with addressing specific, being very specific and addressing. So so my tribe is very mixed. It has a lot of Christians, and then it has a small factor of traditional people. So growing up, I grew up with my grandfather being very close to me, and I learned a lot of stuff from him, like greeting in the morning, doing prayers and so forth. So my grandfather had chosen not to be a Christian. However, his father was actually a preacher, a reverend, and so he was what you call a Chickasaw charge preacher, which is someone who spoke the language and would go to different churches and do sermons. And so that was sort of like how he had married a traditional woman who never became a Christian either. And so their children, there was three of them, and all three of them decided not to become Christian. And so my grandfather was of that generation. And then their children, the government took to boarding schools, to what they call Indian boarding schools, where they were very heavily indoctrinated within Christianity. But my father decided not to become a Christian either. So it's sort of complicated. Whereas my mother was a Christian. My mother is, but my mother is of English descent, and my father is just Chickasaw. And so growing up, I had Christianity on one side and I had traditionalism on the other. And it seems like that's the way my father's family seemed to function for the longest time, one Christian and one not. And so growing up, I would say when I first started doing drag, the main conflict came from, like, I think the Christian side, whereas the traditional side is more about it's more about like nature and being good within your own nature. And so because of that, like there were some things that I did, um, sort of like faith things within traditional elements that actually is like sort of reserved for women. Women are supposed to like fulfill these roles, but I was doing them not knowing that I was actually taking like these window roles, and no one ever told me, no one ever said you can't do that. So I was already doing these things when I was very young. So because of that, I don't think that I felt any kind of conflict at all from the indigenous side. I felt more of the conflict from 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 the Christian side more than anything else. But then I go back to the fact that there's so many Christian natives that could be conflicted, but they weren't that close to me, so I was okay.
Great, thank you so much for addressing that as well. Now, I think as drag artists, it's somewhere or the other way. Our intent is to kind of be very visible and visible forces for the overall spread of the queer community, and especially within the LGBTQ community. And of late, I think though there were a lot of two-spirited drag artists who were in around the world, but it's only this entire conversation of somebody who's two-spirited and drag might have started from the from where I think a recent drag artist stepped into RuPaul's Drag Race in Canada. I'm just trying to get the name correctly. I think the name is Shalina, if I'm correct, or did I mispronounce that?
Oh, I think you're speaking of Jaylene.
Jaylene,
There's
yeah,
there's
Jaylene.
actually been a native drag artist on each season
Uh-huh.
of Canada's Drag Race,
And
and
I think there was one from Chaos's. Yeah, I think I'm just confused between the US and the UK versions. No, US, UK, and Canada
yeah,
version. I'm seeing too much of Drag Race.
that's yeah. On Canada, there's been an Indigenous person every single season. So they're now on their fifth season. So they had at least five Native people, and then there are some people who are part of Canada's Drag Race that that are also of Indigenous descent that may not necessarily reflect it in any of the drag or any of their personality. But Jaylene Times, which is the most recent drag race on Canada's Five, has been very active in promoting her two-spiritness as well um, as her Indigenous community.
Yeah.
But if you want to see me on RuPaul, you can go to the first season. I'm in like episode 9, I think. And so I was the first person to say, "Hey, I'm Chickasaw," blah 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 blah. So
No, I would definitely
I
revisit. I think I haven't seen actually the first season at all. It's just that I have seen some glimpse of Chanel, Angina, and yeah, just few snippets of it. And unfortunately I have to subscribe to Wow, which is a world of wonders, which is very expensive in India. So
yes.
my only content to drive it is YouTube, where Michelle Visage comes and says, do you want gay shit, then you can watch the YouTube channel. But yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that. So I was trying to ask, uh, as we kind of create drag, as we kind of, especially within US and the current political scenario over there, where there's a lot of anti-trans, drag legislators which are being placed. Do you think drag can be a medium to kind of counter these, and especially with faith conversations towards it? Like, we are not channelizing the idea of queer liberation, but we are using the very own sword which is being thrown to us, which is faith, to counter back and say that, okay, if you say that faith is a problem which says that drag is sin, I will use the same kind of a faith to kind of re-channelize and re-question your existence of hate. So do you think that is those kind of conversations are more needed in the US and across the world as well, because everything is every country is battling the same kind of situation actually.
I think so. I think that one of the things that is sort of something that always hits me when I hear these conversations is how quickly people will sexualize things, and in the context of things like drag story hour, for instance, where you go and you speak to kids, it's as though like somehow you put on makeup and you lose all your senses, and you don't know where you are and you're just going to perform anything. That doesn't make sense to me. Like, you're different in different situations, and consequently, you build up on those platforms, just like you would if you were watching an actor on TV. It's sort of the same thing. The actor isn't going to come on a children's show and say wildly offensive things. That doesn't make sense, and it wouldn't get past censors. And also, just the person's reflection of their own mind doesn't seem to be like in the right state if that's happening. So I don't understand why they make such a big deal out of it, and they do really heavily emphasize sex rather than the idea that what most drag artists are doing is a form of entertainment. And that's one of the things that I just can't get into the conversations, because it's so sexualized. And I know that, like, for my character, for instance, my character is, I would have to say my character has done a lot of things over time. And I've done some very rude, terrible things that I probably would not ever do again, because times have changed. So I would never do some of the performances that I did maybe once upon a time. But at the same time, at the time, and in the time, it was provocative at that time. Not as provocative now. Now it's just plain offensive. So, you even change as a person, as an entertainer too, because you have to change with the times. So I think that a lot of these ideas that a person is stuck into one thing is sort of very limiting, and it shows like a very narrow view. So I think that there has to be something that sort of broadens people's view of just people. And I think a lot of that can be done by just humanizing people and keeping the idea that we're all human and we all have choices, and as drag artists we can be entertaining, but we don't have to be stuck into one corner of a genre such as.
Thank you so much for addressing something which is very important. I think, I perform drag, and one of the go-to things which I kind of, impersonate, or which I kind of create. My character is basically a middle-aged woman, and that too somebody who's a aesthetic middle-aged, auntie, somebody who looks like my mother. And one of the things which we often do in India is like wear a sari. And sari is non-sexual attire. It's something which is completely wrapped up around your body, and it no way kind of looks very sexual, if I kind of present it. And when I perform drag somewhere or the other way, it isn't that aesthetic. I sing sometimes very focused or very devotional songs in a public space. I kind of barge into. And usually what happens is, like, when I perform something like this, people still see the art form with the lens of what we call the English name drag, and try to come back and critique the same conversation. Oh, what if a child is seeing you performing in public, and they think that it's very sexual, because somewhere or the other way, the idea of sexuality, or idea of hypersexualization has been put in place. And it's not only within drag as a specific art form, but also if I see how films or how music has been accessed to people, we don't have the same kind of a lens when we're opening up spaces for a film or for a music, and especially in India, especially if you see the regular Bollywood music, oftentimes they are very misogynist, where they're very kind of elementally kind of commenting on body parts of women, and body parts of men, etc. So when the idea of sexualization is so much out, it's just that people are not seeing across the art forms, but only targeting a specific art form, saying, okay, this is sexual, this might not be a fit for children. So that is something which has been a common discourse across as well within India. And one of the best thing which I thought might work out for me is like, I would always wear a sari. If I wear a sari, people assumes that I'm a very sacred woman in one or the other way, and help me navigate that initial hate. So once somebody sees you in a sari, they might not come back and say that, oh, you're looking sexual in a public place. So I tend to do that. Now I want to ask you one thing about like appropriation and appropriation of identities. And especially I'm asking this question because I know that there were times where drag artists, on the urge of creativity, might have done something which is very appropriate for a certain communities. Did you kind of had any experiences where you have seen artists appropriating indigenous communities or indigenous looks in one or the other way? And what could be one way how we can kind of have an active awareness and communication within the drag spaces to address such kind of a situation?
Well, yes, that's a very clear one, and I there's a one word answer to that, and that's share. Cher has continuously wore like headdresses. I'm sorry, did I pause for just a moment? Okay, all right. Yeah, Cher is the epitome of cultural appropriation for Native people. She has a song Half Breed in which she often wears a headdress. So people love Cher and they will often copy her. And when they do, they often wear like the big headdress. And the thing is, the thing that really gets me is that back in like the 70s when the song first came out, it was a different time. But even within that time period, there were natives who were offended by it and were saying things about it. And this is where Cher came up with the story that she was Cherokee. But if you ask the Cherokee Nation, she's not a Cherokee citizen. So she's really not Cherokee. And I wish that trope would die. But she loves wearing that headdress. And as a consequence, many people within the drag community will also come out with that headdress. And it's rather offensive. So yeah, cultural appropriation, it still exists. And then Pocahontas, the musical, people fell in love with Pocahontas as a cartoon. So you'll see many people coming out and dressing as Pocahontas with a headdress. But in the movie, she never wore a headdress, but they'll add it to it because it's more authentic in their minds. And for my tribe never had headdresses like that. We were a different culture. We didn't do that. And it's funny how people will stamp like one piece of culture and apply it to the whole. And so our culture was different. We didn't have headdresses like that. Our headwear was different. And so they love to apply it and do it constantly. And so yeah, I've seen it so many times. I've had conversations with people after they have performed it and asked them to stop. And also just the term half breed isn't really a very nice term. And as a person who grew up hearing it, as someone who is mixed half and half, it was not a pretty term to me. I think the first time I heard it was from a little old lady in Oklahoma who I was in the toy section of a store and she said, "I'm watching you, you little half-breed." So at that moment, I realized that half-breed was not a good word. It was not a proper word. And so I've hated it ever since. And Cher's song does not make me feel good.
Great. So thank you so much for sharing. Could you also help us, because drag is a very affirming art form. As a trans non-binary individual, when I perform drag, it's something which I don't only experience the idea of transness, but I also kind of experience a vivid range of emotions while I'm performing drag. I become a very different, being altogether. And sometimes I also feel very much of spiritually as well as, faithfully connected to the art form. And I've been having some conversations with other drag artists across, and they say that being queer and being drag artist or creating that idea of queerness on a more visible form itself is a very magical moment for individuals. So, were there any instances in your artistry or in your art experience where you felt very much affirmed and connected to your faith and your spirituality while performing drag? And if you could give us some examples of the same.
Well, when okay, so first I'll explain what this is. So for your listeners, when we have like a big dance that we all gather together, and oftentimes it's different tribal nations all come together for this big dance called a powwow. And at this dance, everybody comes and they come in their regalia, which is their traditional wear. So, some people come in buckskin because it's their traditional wear. And in my tribe is tear cloth. So it's tear dresses, which is cotton cloth, and their dresses, and the men wear ribbon shirts, and the women wear tear dresses. So quite often at these powwows, I'll come in a tear dress, and I will dance in the women's style. And all of these dances are considered somewhat of medicine dances or traditional dances. So I will come in and I'll dance that. One of the big things that my tribe does specifically is what we call stomp dance. And stomp dance is very different from powwow in that stomp dance is performed at night, and we build a big pyre of fire, and we dance throughout the whole night into around it, and we have different songs for the whole night, and we have different stomp leaders and everything else. And during this time, women wear shakers on their ankles. So the sound sh, 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 is a sound that you'll hear all night. And most of that sound is coming from the women because the women are wearing them on their ankles. So you'll hear sh, 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 sh. So that's where the rhythm is coming from. And the men are singing. And for the callback, so the men will sing, and then other men will sing, and then there are times where men will sing, and then the men and women sing all together. So this is sort of like how it goes. So I wore the shakers. I have my own shakers. So I will go to a stomp dance and I will wear the shakers. Some stomp dances will not let that happen. They will refuse Two-Spirit people to wear shakers if they feel like they were born a man. They cannot wear the shakers. But I've often wondered about that identity, in the fact that if someone was born identified as female and then transitioned into manhood, are they able to wear the shakers? Should they wear the shakers, even though, and I just find it as sort of like a little bit of westernization that has sort of crept into our traditional practices, because I don't think that in the past it was such a big deal. But who knows? I can't really say. I'm not an anthropologist. I can't go back into the past and say, oh, people who were Hatakekulana were a part of the stomp dance in this way. But what I can say is this: I know that there have been Two-Spirit people that have existed. The Hatakekulana existed because my great-grandfather, Reverend Robert Thomas, wrote about it in a sermon where he complained that the stomp dance leader on the Red River lived with a man as a wife or as a woman. So from that, I could easily garner that it was the stomp dance leader and his partner that were together, and that was really bothering my great grandfather. So I know that in traditional things, they were definitely included because here was a leader, obviously that was a leader or a Miko that was leading it. So I know that in that instance, in our faith, in our traditions, then I can clearly see that our people were once connected like that.
Great, thank you so much for sharing this wonderful anecdote. Coming to the very end of the conversation, I just want to quickly check with you, what is that one advice which you would like to give it to young people who are kind of either trying to come out as queer individuals, or even trying to be their authentic self while pursuing drag, and especially somebody who's might be kind of in a very crux of a moment to align with their idea of faith, or align with their idea of their marginalized identities which they kind of carry. What is that one advice which you like to give to these young kids on how can they navigate these conflicts?
I could say this. I could say that I don't believe that there's a written timeline. There's not a timeline. There's not a forced you have to do this now. Um, you have to do it when it's right for you. And it it may be that it's not right for you for a while, or it may be that it's right for you right now. So don't think that you have to pattern yourself after other people. You have to pattern yourself after yourself, and you have to come out when it's time for you. And so that would be my big advice. A lot of people may regret not coming out sooner, as they grow older, but I think the timeline is purely your own, and I don't think that rushing to it because people have given you pressure to do it is so much the right. It may not be the right thing for you. I've known people who've had to leave their whole families once they've come out. So it really is up to that person, that individual, and their circumstances. So that would be my advice. There's no timeline. Do it when you're ready.
Great. So thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for taking this time. It was so wonderful to have a conversation with you and also learn about a lot of things from your culture. One thing which I would definitely do is like go back, listen to this conversation again, and also kind of learn. The internet is something which is very vast, and it's always interesting to kind of learn and be educated about multiple cultures, which we kind of have as a as and when we kind of grow. And it also affirms to look into the existence of trans and non-binary people for from a decade early, and see how exactly the societies were far more better, far more functional, and far more loving each other than kind of going ahead and creating this entire hate, which we are as a young upcoming nations and generations spewing out in our society. So thank you so much for sharing it. And to all the people who are listening to the conversation as well, I would be mentioning the Instagram link of Landa Lakes as well in the Spotify as well as on my Instagram page. So please go and follow, know their work, and you can also kind of write to us at any point in time if you have any questions. That is pcass number 3 at gmail.com, and I'll be more than happy to listen to your comments if you have any kind of an advice and help you in one or the other way. So that was our conversation today. Thank you so much, Landa Lakes, for joining us, taking your precious time, and sharing some very wonderful information of your journey. And it's really an honor to have you as a part of this conversation. It adds so much of a value to this podcast as well. And somewhere or the other way, I think I'm doing a very right thing at the end of 2024. I feel like I'm gaining a lot of experiences which would amp me up enough to do what I'm doing as an artist for the next year of 2025. So with that note, thank you so much and happy new year in advance for 2025.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Thank you. So, to all the people who are listening or have been listening to this particular podcast, please go ahead and shove some love to Landa Lakes. The description of or their Instagram handle is in the description in the Spotify, and you can also follow us on Jagwanti as well as SAS3 Dancing Feet, which are my personal profiles to know more about such kind of a conversation. And I hope you are having a very good time. Uh, advance Happy New Year to everybody who's listening to it, and I hope that this conversation is something which would add up a lot of value. So thank you so much for listening to us and being a part of this particular podcast. And until the next time I meet you, have a great day.